All right. Well, before we hear from Christine Blasey Ford, the accuser of Judge Kavanaugh here, and argued that he attacked her when they were high school students almost 4 decades ago, her lawyer is saying, you know what, there should be a full FBI investigation into this, and then we'll talk. But it got us thinking. It happens here sometimes with me. What would that involve, and how long would it be? And is it the FBI's role to do that or go this far back in what would certainly be a precedent-breaking event? Let's ask former FBI Assistant Director Ron Hosko. I'm not even looking at the politics of one side or the other here. I'm just curious as to what are the FBI's responsibilities here. If they're called upon to investigate something, even like this, are they obligated to do so?
If called on by the White House, Neil, I think they would immediately undertake this responsibility. They were responsible for conducting the background investigation initially of Judge Kavanaugh, as they do of other White House nominations. They dig deeply into their backgrounds, although generally not to look into high school records if someone is in their 50s. They look closely. Their job, part of the job, is to surface derogatory information so that the White House can make a good choice about pursuing a nomination or perhaps withdrawing from one. So it's certainly within their mission requirements if the White House chooses to additionally task them here. They are really a service provider for the White House.
So the White House would have to make that call. President Trump would have to make that call.
That's right. Or the White House counsel's office could call to the FBI Security Division and say, we want you to reopen this and go cover this ground. And I'm sure the FBI would do this very quickly. They treat these as special investigations. They used to be known as spins in my day. And they could cover leads on her allegations very, very quickly.
All right. Now, they would presumably in that event, Ron, I guess, talk to witnesses or try to find them at the time. But there'd be no way of ascertaining proof one way or the other in what would invariably be a he said, she said situation. Right. So what happens there with that material?
Well, you know, the starting point is the accuser is Ms. Ford. I think that they would have to first get her cooperation, have her lay out the best recollection she has. If that included other people who she knew were at this party, who were they? The FBI could set about tracking them down to validate that they were there, that they recall her being there. Again, you know, part of the difficulty, Neil, is obvious. We're talking about recollections that for most people are 35 years away and not momentous as they are to the accuser. So it could be very difficult indeed to have anybody who says, I remember the event.
So normally if you misstate or lie to the FBI, you perjure yourself, that's a crime. In this particular case, if someone, the old John Dean line, misremembers, then what is the punishment there? Because to your earlier point, there's no way of ascertaining who's telling the truth per se. So how does that go?
Well, generally, the FBI is not looking to pursue a prosecution for misremembering. And we should keep in mind, if the universe of witnesses and information is as finite as it appears, there's a bunch of pretty smart lawyers on the Senate Judiciary Committee who could ask the same very questions of Ms. Ford herself. And when sworn testimony, she would face the risk of perjury, just like the risk of a false statement prosecution by the FBI if it's intentional. No one's looking to prosecute accidental misremembering statements. What we're looking for is the truth.
So this is a separate area. I don't even know if the FBI was ever involved in this. In the Catholic Church, priest, scandals that happened, some dating back decades. Right. How did they ascertain which were accurate and credible versus those that weren't, especially in the case of people who had passed away here? Now, different case, I grant you, but I'm just trying to understand how you discern and glean information which you find to be reliable versus questionable.
Yeah, look, first, you're trying to corroborate essential facts. That could include places, other people who you confided in at the time, people who you've confided in subsequently, confessions, admissions by participants, being challenged on whether your assertions and your version of the facts are truthful. And all of that can often yield fruit and give the sense that someone is more credible than someone else. To my knowledge, the FBI hasn't been involved. I don't know of a jurisdictional basis for the FBI to be involved in the Catholic Church scandal.
Right. Neither do I. I just raised that there. But how long would this take, the optimum time that you think it would take if the president were to say, look into this? How long?
I think with complete cooperation from Ms. Ford and from Judge Kavanaugh and Mr. Judge, who we've been told are the alleged participants, that part could be covered by close of business tonight and on paper and on the White House desk tomorrow. Then it comes down to, because you have two folks saying, I don't know anything about this, how much more detail can Ms. Ford provide? Are there people, not tracking back a place to take pictures of the colors of the wall and looking at the furniture, but are there people who can corroborate what she's saying, her presence there, her demeanor going from the party, the fact or whether Judge Kavanaugh and Mr. Judge were seen there. That gets a little bit harder to track down witnesses that she would identify and try to commit that to the record. But I think that could also be done over the weekend if the information came quickly.
Ron, thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.